right, I think we can go ahead and get started. I think people are still joining us, but I have a few comments and announcements to make, so that'll give people time. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, also known as SIMS, I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this online lecture. My name is Lynn Ransom, and I'm the curator for programs at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I'm joined today by my colleague, Nicholas Herman, the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator of Manuscripts, and Dot Porter, the Curator of Digital Humanities for the Schoenberg Institute. Today marks our first lecture in this fall's online lecture series, and I'm delighted by so many familiar and new names and faces that I see on my screen as everyone sort of lines up on the edge of my screen. Now in its sixth year, the online lecture series intends to bring together scholars and students from around the world and at all levels to our virtual table to share and discuss current research and projects in the field of global manuscript studies. And I'm grateful the tradition continues as we start this new academic year. Before we begin, I have a few announcements to share. In particular, registration for this year's Schoenberg Symposium, which is now in its 18th year, is open. The symposium will be held in Philadelphia from November 20th to 22nd, and will be on the topic Interpreting the Ancients. The symposium coincides with an exhibition called Reinventing Aristotle, which will be held this fall at Penn's Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts, and is co-organized with one of the exhibition curators, Eva Del Soldato, who's professor of Italian studies at Penn. I believe the exhibition opens October 3rd and will be on view for 3 months or so. So please come, if you're in the Philadelphia area, please come to the exhibition. I'm sure it will be a spectacular one. So the topic of the symposium presents an opportunity to consider manuscript evidence in the transmission of ancient wisdom and authorities throughout the medieval and into the early modern period. And we have an excellent roster of speakers this year, and I invite you to register now for either in-person or virtual attendance via the link in the chat, which I believe Dot has put in already. And this link will also take you to a full program and a list of the speakers. I'm confident to say that there is something in the program for nearly everyone, and we look forward to seeing you either in Philadelphia or online in November. Another program I'd like to mention is our Coffee with a Codex series, a weekly online manuscript sort of show and tell that's led by Dot Porter. Each week, Dot brings out a manuscript or a group of manuscripts and browses through them in conversation with the attendees who join online. And it's a really nice kind of low-key opportunity to engage with and learn more about manuscripts in our collection in a very friendly and open setting. And finally, I'd also like to remind our audience that we're always seeking submissions for our Journal of Manuscript Studies, which is a diamond level open access journal, meaning that there are no author fees to contribute your article, and the content is available free and online through Project Muse. I encourage you to submit your research either as a full-length peer-reviewed research article or as an annotation, which is a section that features shorter preliminary findings, new discoveries, project reports, etc. If you're interested in hearing more about our programs, events, and publications, please do sign up for our newsletter via the link that should be in the chat now. And now I'd like to turn to the reason we are all here, and that is the lecture. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Michael Zellman-Rohrer. Dr. Zellman-Rohrer, who is joining us from Australia in the middle of his night, is a paleographer, epigraphist, and papyrologist with a research focus in the history of science and religion. He holds a PhD in classics and medieval studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and works as a researcher for a European Research Council project entitled Zodiac, Ancient Astral Science and Transformation at the Freie Universität in Berlin. A resulting monograph, Greek Astrological Treatises on Papyrus, will be published by Oxford University Press in 2026. And Dr. Zellman-Rohrer's first book, Greek Magic, Select Texts from the Byzantine Tradition and Beyond, is now in press with Dumbarton Oaks and Harvard University Press. He is also a director at large of the American Society of Papyrologists, a senior editor of the Supplementum Epigraphicum Graecum, and an honorary research fellow of Sydney's Macquarie University. In 2024, he was named one of 10 rising stars by the Australian Academy of the Humanities. And last year, SIMS was lucky enough to host Dr. Zellman-Rohrer as a visiting research fellow, during which time he was able to explore in depth our rich collection of astrological and astronomical manuscript collections. Today, Dr. Zellman-Rohrer will be sharing some of what he found and learned in his talk entitled Pages of Stars, Case Studies in the History of the Astral Sciences. Michael, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Lynn, and let me already make sure I'm sharing slides, and I can make that full screen. And all right, so thank you again, Lynn, and to the Schoenberg Institute for an opportunity to revisit, even if only virtually, a pleasant stay in Philadelphia earlier this year. Since I'm speaking to you from Sydney, as Lynn mentioned, where the support of Macquarie University has helped me continue to develop this project, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which the university stands, the Wallamadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose knowledge has nurtured that land since time immemorial, including tens of thousands of years of unbroken traditions of knowledge about the stars, a humbling thing for me to keep in mind as I focus on manuscripts from a few centuries of the Common Era. This talk offers a progress report on a larger project to place manuscripts on the astral sciences from Europe and the wider Mediterranean world in their social context. In research supported by SIMS in 2025, I examined the rich holdings of the Schoenberg collection in the astral sciences, as well as the rest of UPenn's manuscript collections, with the patient help of the Kislak Center staff, and was also able to benefit from the local expertise personified in the SIMS staff to explore other collections in Greater Philadelphia. And I'd like to single out Lynn Ransom here, who was a tireless supporter of these activities. Next year, thanks to the generosity of the American Trust for the British Library, I also plan to continue the search in London and Oxford. But here I begin with some background on the astral sciences, a central concept for the project, and the doctrinal developments that laid the foundations for the practices that I hope to trace. Behind the choice of astral science over astronomy and astrology is a contention, no longer surprising to specialists, but still requiring justification in a wider discourse, that the two fields in pre-modern times represented a continuum of practice. The usage of the Greek words astrologia and astronomia that give us the modern terms astrology and astronomy was complex. Modern working definitions tend to align astronomy with the study of the motions of celestial bodies, the fixed stars and planets, and astrology with the prediction of events on Earth on the basis of those motions. But an introduction to an ancient horoscope on papyrus for a birth in the reign of Commodus situates the document, which we would consider astrology, within the discipline of astronomia, which is then praised. Astronomia is by no means separate from divination, but I, the voice of the man who cast the horoscope, consider it more powerful, as it is the result of the contemplations of the wise. The philosopher Sextus Empiricus, writing in the late 2nd or early 3rd century of the Common Era, is one of the first to formulate a hard opposition between astrologers and astronomers, to the detriment of the former, whom he spends a full book berating. But following a growing consensus among historians of science, we should recognize that the ancient precursors to astronomy, description of the motions of the stars and theory to explain them, owe their existence to astrology, the use value of prediction of events on Earth from those celestial motions. I first approached these questions in the context of a research project based in Berlin, Zodiac, Ancient Astral Science and Transformation. Through collaboration among Assyriologists, Egyptologists, and classicists, the project studies how the technology of the astral sciences moved and was adapted and developed between pre-Hellenistic Mesopotamia and the West. Central to that is the uniform zodiac of 12 signs illustrated on the slide, developed in Babylonia from reference constellations of unequal sizes along the sun's annual path with respect to the fixed stars. My focus has been on editing a corpus of the little-studied Greek astrological treatises on papyrus, which document the doctrinal innovations in Egypt that led to the distinctive Hellenistic astrology visible in Roman authors like the poet Manilius and the polymath Claudius Ptolemy. The papyri also show how these texts were embedded in the daily life of Roman Egyptians, a wider swath of society than elite intellectuals and their patrons. This slide shows a papyrus from the Fayum region, southwest of Cairo, in which an official document has been reused on the back to copy a short extract from an astrological treatise, and some practice drafting a horoscope for presentation to a client. The astral sciences of medieval and early modern times are in turn unthinkable without this ancient background. Still to be traced in detail are developments in late antiquity, a key time of transition beginning around 300 CE with respect to medieval and early modern Europe, where the resources of the Schoenberg manuscripts are concentrated and where the situation was especially complex. There were lines of transmission on the continent across nations, languages, and faiths, making use of directly inherited knowledge from the Greek and Roman world, but increasingly also new confections from intellectual exchange with the Islamicate world, which had in turn been doing the same with a mix of traditions from the ancient Arabian homeland, from contacts to the east with Persia and India, and borrowings from Hellenistic and Roman science in translation. The stakes for the social historian lie in how each society, each intellectual community that received this knowledge tended to make it their own. The opportunity to see this taking place before our eyes in detail is one of the rewards of close study of the manuscript witnesses to the astral sciences. From the embarrassment of riches for the historian of science that is constituted by the LJS manuscripts, I have selected just 4 for this lecture. Each one focuses on a different language, and the hope is that eventually, and with due caution, this can provide balance in geographic and religious context too, as well as the potential to trace cross-cultural exchange on an individualized level. I begin with an early modern Greek codex, which, based on previous descriptions, I did not expect to offer anything on the astral sciences, but given my fondness for Greek manuscripts, I couldn't resist having a look. And I was in for a pleasant surprise. This paper manuscript of 121 leaves had previously been described as an herbal in the tradition of Dioscorides, a famous Roman author on the medicinal use of plants. The feature that draws the eye to it most strongly is a program of illustrations that has points of contact with the medieval tradition of illustrated copies of Dioscorides. In our codex, multiple herbs are combined on each page, and there are multiple levels of annotation in colored and black ink and later lead point on the names of the herbs, and in some cases, their uses. But as a table of contents provided in the manuscript itself and a title indicated on the first numbered page already indicate, there is much more to the Schoenberg manuscript. That title, which we see here on numbered page 1, already the 31st folio of the Codex is now bound, is in Greek iatrosophion, or collection of healing wisdom, that includes herbs, but also compound drugs, occult properties of other naturally occurring substances, and ritual means of healing that moderns have long labeled magic. We will see some examples of that in due course. The title runs, beginning with God, the Holy One, of the iatrosophion, of the three teachers, Galen, Isocrates, and Dioscorides, before introducing the first section on the composition of juleps. Before we leave this slide, a note on position in intellectual traditions, that in addition to the ancient authors Galen and Dioscorides and the Isocrates, who may appear by miscopying of the name of the famous physician Hippocrates, eventually a more recent authority is referenced. In a second hand, one Nikephoros Xanthopoulos is cited on the stages of development of the fetus. If this is Nikephoros Kallistos Xanthopoulos, he is better known as an ecclesiastical than a scientific writer, and I have not succeeded in locating this lemma in his surviving works. But the name, in any case, shows the supplement of ancient medical traditions with later Byzantine ones. The pleasant surprise about this manuscript for me was that an anchoring text after the illustrations and before the massive gathering of medical recipes that make up the iatrosophion actually combines herbology and the astral sciences. Already amid the pages collecting botanical illustrations, there is a heading that signals a transition to other herbs, similarly of the 7 planets, along with the 12 zodiac signs. Although there is some conflation in the details already on this page, this part of the Codex belongs to a distinct tradition of the astrological herbal, attested already in Roman times around the time of Dioscorides himself, but adding a layer to the medical recommendations of use determined by affinities held to exist between the plants, which affected in turn the recommendations for when to harvest them and what conditions they were useful to treat, that is based on their affinities to the planets and the zodiac signs. This text continues in connected prose in the same vein after the illustrations end. Here the focus is on zodiac signs alongside planets, implicating a series of angelic powers assigned to them. As shown by this selection for the plant Heptalophos, or 7 crest, assigned to the sign Sagittarius, the recommendations go beyond the strictly medical into other personal protection and benefit, here protection from robbers. The text runs in translation, Heptalophos is the plant of Sagittarius. Take the plant of Sagittarius at the first hour. Eventually, it goes on to say, it should be Saturday with the prayer of the angel who rules the hour. Carry 1 grain, that is, tip of the root, and you will not be injured unlawfully. Understand something like through unlawful activity. Place a grain of the root and bind in skin from a horned goat. Some allusion here perhaps to the zodiac sign Capricorn, and attach it to your arm, and you will have no fear of robbers, but they will revere you like a god. What about the content of the majority of the manuscript, these mostly anonymous medical recipes? They remain unpublished and deserve closer study than I have yet been able to give them. As a sample, here is the first page of the table of contents, which shows the first 30 numbers out of a total of 697 numbered recipes. The first 6, of which you see just the first 4 in text and translation by way of example, target specific ailments, headache caused by excess of bile, indigestion, phlegm, nephritis, dropsy, and gout, with a preparation whose name, zulapion, a loanword from Arabic julab, betrays a background in transfer of knowledge from the Islamic world, perhaps even in the context of an area under Ottoman rule in which the compilation may have been produced, and also yields, by the way, the name of a modern drink, the julep. Further exploration of the mass of medicinal material, not in fact entirely covered even by this table of contents, even at its large scale of 27 pages, promises a more nuanced sense of its range. So here are just a few more samples. This slide shows the extension of healing means beyond pharmacology to ritual, the so-called magic, no less dependent on and grounded in Christian religious practice. Here to treat nosebleed and insomnia. To stop a nosebleed, the first recipe recommends writing an extract from an apocryphal gospel, the Protevangelium of James, and an exhortation from the liturgy, both analogizing the desired solidification and stoppage of the blood. Zacharias was slaughtered in the temple of the Lord, and his blood is fixed like a stone on the ground, and it will not be wiped away until his avenger comes. Let us stand aright, let us stand with fear of God. The second targets insomnia with an inscription consisting of 9 Greek letters without recognizable semantic sense, apparently conveying in their shapes and inscribed presence a healing power which abides with the patient through placement of the substrate laurel leaves, perhaps also appealing as offering a pleasant scent in the bed sheets. This slide shows a lexicon whose title promises help figuring out the equivalences in the names of plants in Greek, Latin, the common tongue, by which Demotic Greek is probably meant, and Turkish. The former two are already well established in a botanical lexicographical tradition in late antiquity. The latter shows the participation of the codex in social, if not also the medical practice of the Ottoman world, in which the Greek-speaking lands found themselves beginning in the 15th century. The fact that the Greek text is already in a form close to the vernacular, rather than the higher style of the literary language, later the Katharebisa, is suggestive of context in practice, where practitioners were competent in reading and writing, but not invested in classicizing literary culture. And the alignment of the lexicon with the demotic would further facilitate interactions with patients, clients, and various other actors who might, for example, supply medical ingredients or lore about their properties. Astral sciences in this first case study go hand in hand with practical application in the service of well-being. The provision of a 27-page table of contents, which we have met, shows an investment in this direction, in fact unique among the 4 cases selected. How far can the rest of the codex allow us to assess these applications? Marginalia are not very frequent, which can in other cases go to showing active use. Here is one suggestive example seen at the top of the slide in which a recipe has been extended with additional steps, making use of blank space on a line as well as the inner margin by rotating the page 90 degrees. But a non-textual, no less eloquent witness remains the literal cleanness or lack thereof on the book's pages. Significant soiling throughout points to use, and the image at right shows more particularly a splash of some dark liquid. It may be more than a coincidence that the underlying text, now soiled by this spill, describes preparing a medicinal liquid, eventually to be reduced by boiling and applied to sores in the mouth. Now for the Latin case study, I have selected a parchment codex copied in Naples in 1327, now LJS 361. And here we are fortunate to have rather more, in fact, the most of any of the four case studies, in the way of information about the copyist. He identifies himself as a member of a Neapolitan convent and a student in the same city, but his name has been lost to the hand of a later owner who scraped out not only that, but also the name of the convent. As we will see, however, information contained in one of the Astral texts has had more success in escaping this eraser, restoring part of the copyist's identity, or at least his intellectual circle. A sign of planning towards use in spiritual life is an added list beginning on the front inside cover, seen here, and continuing onto the first folio, of occasions for hymns and their incipits, counting 156 items. So to the first text, a table for determining which festal day comes first in each month on a 28-year cycle, reaching back to 1204 and ahead to 1512 as far as marked, but in fact expandable based on the information already written out for centuries ahead of that until 1960. More festal calendrics follow, now marked up to the year 1736, and other sets focus on the timing of movable feasts down to the year 1400, and on how the lengths of day and night vary around the globe. The properly astral surfaces first in a table predicting the times of conjunctions of sun and moon each month for the next 40 years after the copy, up to 1367. That and other tables showing the average rate of motion through a model year of 12 months would have been given point by the next table, which is astrological rather than astronomical, based on the position of the moon in each zodiac sign, and whether that was good, bad, or middling, for a list of 66 different activities, which give a broad cross-section of daily life. You see that on the right. No fewer than 14 were for applying medical treatment to different parts of the body. The student copyist may have appreciated the relevance of the entry studium incipere, to begin a course of study, in fact, good in all of the signs except Sagittarius and Capricorn, where it's no worse than middling. Or if he continued with the religious life, radere caput, to shave the head, only good in Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Sagittarius, and Pisces. But farm work was also served. For example, when to sow seed, plant trees, buy livestock, or put horses out to pasture. And topics of more general interest, arranging marriages, going to bathe, and attempting to conceive children. Another version of this type of advice combines tabular presentation and verse, which may have served a mnemonic effect. Each zodiac sign receives a summary instructing what parts of the body it governs, the so-called melothesia, and 3 verses on what activities are recommended and to be avoided when the moon is found there. Here you see an example for Taurus with a medical and agricultural focus. A table of the days of the weeks and their hours, assigning each to the rule of one of the planets, also served catarchic astrology, as established by the table that follows it in the codex of the same format as the first one that we've seen for the moon, and presenting a broadly comparable, somewhat less medically focused list of 57 activities classified as good, bad, or middling at a time ruled by each planet. Our student copyist may have found particular interest, for example, in the entries for scribere, writing, and sapientiam adiscere, to acquire wisdom by learning. But the wider world of, again, adult, well-off male in general life is represented in public life, meeting kings and princes, going off to war or on business, and private, marriage and family planning again. The parallel structure continues in that this table is followed by another presenting a more selective set of advice in mnemonic verse form, organized by the hour ruling planet. And here you see the example of Venus. The main part of the codex begins on a new quire after a blank page following the last of the calendrical tables, which you see showing through onto the blank on this slide. The hand is contemporary, but probably different from that of the student copyist who signed the inside cover and copied the first part that has held our attention so far. As the text of the next quire on folio 10 also appears to begin in the middle of a thought, and this quire is signed the 11th in the middle of its bottom margin, we have to do with two originally separate units, perhaps brought together in the context of the library of a religious order. The new text, which continues across two further quires, a commentary on Christian scripture, specifically the readings from the Gospels and Epistles selected for the liturgical cycle, based on the sermons of two leading French scholars, Durandus of Saint-Pourçain and Jacobus of Lausanne, both of whom flourished in the early 14th century. The connection to the first unit of the codex, if realized by pre-modern users, may have been in the realm of calendrics, the movement of the planets and the moon, as well as calendrical cycles, structuring spiritual life and pastoral care, as well as everyday activities. Some support for this possibility comes at the end of the commentary excerpts, where a column and a half of blank space originally stood there appears to have been filled with another calendrical table aligning biblical and later chronology, and a prose text, the title of which is given on the slide, Some Effects of the Conjunctions of Planets, which focuses on predicting the weather, but extends, for example, to good times to administer medicine or to let blood. The rest of the quire, and one added by folium, is devoted once again to astrology in a hybrid presentation of prose in tabular form. First, groupings and classifications of the zodiac signs in triplets, then the predictive significance of each sign, counted from the ascendant as one of the 12 houses, here following a conventional scheme, but adding some more detail on which experiences heightened effect, literally joy in the house, and what aspect or geometric relation it has with the first house, the most significant of the group, the ascendant itself. So, for example, place 7 signifies wives and marriages, is in opposition or diametrically across the ecliptic from the ascendant, and is ruled by Mars. This relation of planets and places is explored in another set of tables through the visualization device of the horoscope diagram, in its common medieval form as a square divided into 12 compartments for the zodiac signs and places. At left, this has been used in the first instance for a sort of point scoring table at the center, in how many points of virtus, or strength, each planet has in each zodiac sign. At right, the numbers of the places are equated with their common names based on their relation to the daily motion of the sun, where it rises, culminates, and sets. Here at the center is an unfinished list of technical terms from astrology that suggests that the writer eventually intended to put the horoscope diagram to its usual purpose in illustrating a horoscope, whether real or purely illustrative, by noting down, for example, in the second line, that's, if you're able to see my cursor just here. And the second line, which planet was the Dominus Ascendentis, lord of the zodiac sign that happened to be in the ascendant at the moment in question? Yet another table takes the zodiac signs in order and presents their properties under 9 headings, each in its own column, with a medical orientation, informing on what parts of the body the sign rules, what types of pharmacological and therapeutic treatments it favors and disfavors, including an Arabic loanword, sirupus, for administering a medical syrup, and with what herbs and stones it has sympathy, which would also be relevant for healing practice. Now, as promised, here is a contribution from the final bifolium of the Codex towards restoring our picture of the copyist and his circle, impeded by that erasure at the beginning. This table, presenting the precise degree position of the sun on each day of the month, is presented as the first of 2 tables on astrology realized according to collected tables and ancient and modern astrologers by Brother Gentile. And here the eraser has obliterated this man's second name or family name, but apparently missed his first name. From Orvieto of the Order of Friars Preachers in the Neapolitan convent in the year of the Lord 1327. This matches the statement given at the outset of the Codex, at least as far as scribal activity situated in a Neapolitan convent in the year 1327. If the 2 men were not the same, at least it is likely that they met at this convent, and the then anonymous compiler of the whole was a close associate of this Gentile, who lent him material on the astral sciences in the context of Dominican fellowship at Naples. Later use of this book, regarded as a valuable possession inter alia due to the applicability of its astral science to the future, in some cases, as we've seen, running centuries ahead of the time of writing, is already foreshadowed by the activities of this eraser. A place for prognostication of a more general kind in the later life of the Codex may also have been claimed. Among additions in the front matter is a circle divided into 64 compartments around the edge and 4 quadrants in the center with a finer pen line. This does not match the usual divisions of the ecliptic through astrological doctrines, but just possibly, given the central role of scripture in the middle choirs of the Codex, the purpose was bibliomancy. That is, it was once intended to fill the 64 compartments with text, keying them to significant passages from the Gospels or Psalms, from which predictions could be drawn, both well-attested types of divination. Here on the slide, you see an example focused on the Psalms from a 15th century Greek codex. A charming aspect of later use is worth noting before we leave this manuscript. Amid other marginalia showing philological and theological interest, for example, the identification of citations of other biblical passages than the main ones under discussion, and practical notes, for example, reminding the reader which Sunday a particular sermon suits. The bottom margins of the middle section, the biblical commentaries, have been used on 3 pages for figural drawings. In the analysis of Deborah Ellen Thorpe, they are drawings by children, signaled by the tendency to reduce and geometrically simplify human figures and the absence of fine motor control developed at a later age. If this is right, it could imply the presence of the manuscript in a private collection, a household in which children were present, but an educational one in which an elementary school was somehow attached to a monastic institution should not be excluded. In any case, these drawings do not have to mark the obsolescence of the text, whose later readers may have been motivated to cut out some of them, resulting in the holes observed in the bottom margins of 5 further pages. Now, my choice for the Arabic case study, with which I continue in rough chronological order, was rather difficult, as codices in this language and Persian are probably the strongest representation of the astral sciences in the Schoenberg collection. The one on which I settled cannot match the aesthetic appeal of another, which with Lynn's kind help graces the advertising for this lecture, and that's LJS 434 from 16th century Iran and in the Persian language. But for the history of the astral sciences, it's worth pausing over the presence of Arabic as prestige language of science in various loanwords for technical terms. By way of illustrating one set of doctrines, for example, a horoscope diagram is presented that includes the names of the 12 signs in Arabic and the planet positions in Arabic language and numerical notation. The selected manuscript, LJS 467, allows a closer focus on use. It is a paper manuscript entirely in Arabic, in a script that suggests it was copied in the Maghreb, Northern Africa. The hand is practiced, but not calligraphic, suggesting a product for the personal use of an educated person. The watermarks establish the use of Western paper, and in conjunction with the hand, a date in the 14th century when the export of such paper to the Maghreb begins. The main text, as has been recognized, concerns astrological forecasts with a focus on the weather and implications for agriculture. Even this text, however, remains unpublished and little explored. It would repay detailed study, and I can only give a selective overview here, along with pointing out that an assignment to astrometeorology is only part of the story, as other events in the life of individual and society are also concerned in the forecasts. According to the title, the main text is an excerpt from Properties of the Lunar Mansions, Manazil, and in the Maghreb, they are called Anwa, so the title already provides a gloss. Already in the title, the codex shows adaptation of wider traditions to a local context. The lunar mansions are a way of tracking the moon's course over the lunar month in reference to constellations of fixed stars along its path. The doctrine was originally developed in India, adopted in Arabia in the 7th century, and eventually adopted in the West in the Middle Ages via Latin and in Byzantium in Greek. A central innovation in the Arabic tradition was to add one station, or manzil, to the original 27 used in India, which allowed an alignment with the pre-Islamic Arabian Anwa, 28 reference stars along the sun's path, the ecliptic, not specific to the moon. These were also transformed from the original constellations of varying size into 28 uniform divisions, and catalogs of them also aligned them with the coordinate system of the zodiac signs at the center of the astral sciences in the Greek and Roman world and the wider Mediterranean in late antiquity. Without going, for considerations of time, into the details of the treatise, it can be said briefly that it bears out the alignment of the Manazil and Anwa doctrines with the zodiac, as the conditions on which forecasts are made include observing where both the sun and the moon are with reference to the mansions as well as to the zodiac signs, buruj in Arabic. The highest order variable in these conditions is the month, and here the manuscript points up the intercultural complexities of North Africa and the wider Mediterranean with which it was in contact. The tradition is pictorial as well as textual. Mansions are also introduced with their schematic figures, surah or surah, one of which is shown on this slide, which would have had practical use, facilitating sighting in the night sky, but also provided a way to anchor the doctrine in a concrete celestial reality. To return to the calendar, The months in which observations are taken are introduced in the first instance under transliterations of the Julian month names, a legacy from the Roman provinces of Mauritania and Africa, which remained in use under Islam and continue to form the basis of the traditional Berber calendar in Morocco, as well as Algeria and Tunisia. It is thus the natural starting point, despite being labeled here as of the foreigners or non-Arabs, al-Ajam, in the text, but it is also equated with two other systems of relevance for cultures in contemporary contact, what the text calls the Syrian year and the Coptic or Egyptian year. An additionally multi-faith environment is indicated by the timing of one of the manazil under the month of December to include the fast of the Nativity, Sawm al-Milad, that is the Nativity of Christ. Two additional texts allow further contextualization, one probably original to the Codex and truncated by its current fragmentary state, the other a later addition on a blank page at the front. The latter is the Hizb al-Bahr, a well-known prayer composed by a 13th century Moroccan mystic and founder of a Sufi order, Abu al-Hassan al-Shadili. In addition to general protection and prosperity, it asks more specifically for enlightenment in terms broadly consonant with the foreknowledge the owner of such a text as this astrological treatise seek. The other text is more directly related to prognostication, an excerpt from a longer treatise applying numerology to divination, how arithmetical operations on the numerical values of the letters of personal names predict the future of those persons. Here, the outcome of a conflict between two people which one of them will prevail. On the other hand, perhaps the same one as the one that copied the Sufic prayer has added some notes in the margin on the arithmetic aspect, following the division of sample numbers by factors of 2 through 9. That's just under the cursor here. Now our selection for Hebrew takes us to the later 14th or early 15th century and to the south of Spain, whose unique mixture of languages and faiths also included Latin and Arabic, Western Christianity, and Islam, witnessed in our last two cases. This is probably the best known of the Schoenberg manuscripts among these selected four, and with good reason. We'll come in due course to some striking illuminations that make it a rare witness indeed. Executed in a semi-cursive Sephardic script, with the older square script used as a display script for titles, the codex is made up of 114 folia of parchment and can readily be recognized as a luxurious product. There are polychrome illustrations, which we'll soon see, and artful arrangement of text on the page. Multiple colors help the eye to navigate astronomical tables, as here, where, among other things, we can see the continued use of a symbol for 0, continuing a form found in early Greek astronomical tables on papyrus. So on the papyrus, several times in this column, this symbol here, and then in our Hebrew manuscript in this column, for example, here and here, alternating with a simplified form reduced just to the more familiar circle. But here sometimes art makes comprehension more difficult, as in the table of terms or sections of zodiac signs assigned to planets, which we've already met once, transformed here into a geometric figure that requires constant zigzag change of writing direction to follow. So just to take the example of Taurus beginning here but then requiring the reader to know that one has to follow, in fact, this path to get this sequence. The Codex preserves a rare example of an illustrated version of the star catalog of Claudius Ptolemy, originally composed in the 2nd century CE, with positions actualized for 1391 CE at a latitude of about 39 degrees north, which would place the copy in southern Spain or modern Portugal. 48 constellations and over 1,000 stars are mentioned. There are signs of wear through use, and some of the drawings have been reworked. The outlines and faces of Auriga and Ophiuchus, shown here, the former's flail, perhaps all in the same ink, as an elaborate maniculus in the outer margin. Beyond this series of individual asterisms, the Codex adds visualization in full views of northern and southern celestial hemispheres. Scholars, most recently Ellie Becker, have traced different iconographic traditions behind the star catalog and the hemispheres. The hemispheres do not show the stars as the catalog illustrations do, and substitute the simpler coordinate system of the uniform zodiac signs with which the constellation figures overlap only partially. Despite some signs of Western iconographic preferences, such as the fair-haired Virgo and nude Gemini, Decker has argued that the hemispheres are adapted from an Islamic celestial globe, and the star catalog has been recognized as dependent on Arabic textual tradition, probably in part through Latin. The most detailed study so far of the texts of LJS 57, once in the collection of David Solomon Sassoon, is owed to Carl Fischer, Paul Kunitsch, and Zvi Langermann from microfilms, working from microfilms when the Codex was in private hands. The original wasn't accessible to them at that time. Fortunately, this situation changed after the purchase by Larry Schoenberg in 1996 and the subsequent gift to Penn. There is another opportunity for refinement in future study. The article of these three scholars, as you can see from the title, focused on astronomical components, but astrology was no less central to the plan of the manuscript as we have it, that is, prediction from, as opposed to observation of and theory about the movements of the stars. And the prose works that form the core of the Codex, around its middle third, could even be said to emphasize it over astronomy. There is an opportunity for a rebalancing in future work, especially the application of the evidence of this Codex to social and intellectual history. The astrological works of Abraham ibn Ezra contained in it have now benefited from a critical edition by Shlomo Sela, but another work attributed to a scholar of the astral sciences from Roman Egypt, the same Claudius Ptolemy as of the star catalog, here probably pseudonymously, remains unpublished. Here you have an example of the beginning and the start of the first section. There are corresponding ones for the rest of the 11 zodiac signs. Among the tables, which take up 2/3 of the Codex, one of which we've already seen, astrology is also represented. In addition to the usual information on or giving steps towards the calculation of precise positions of planets and fixed stars, information for astrological analysis is also tabulated, as, for example, this presentation of the names and analytical scope of the 12 places of Greco-Roman astrology. Here, each a numbered house, Beth in Hebrew, from 1 to 12. So too was the intersection of the astral sciences and religion, in which planets, as divine powers, were attributed talismanic seals that could be of help in earthly life, here gathered along with other data on each planet in another table. That of Jupiter, which you see here enlarged, betrays ancient origins in the Greek Zeus. The selection of material for this codex also suggests a concern with observation, as in this design for an astronomical instrument, the astrolabe. Even here, astronomy and astrology are intertwined, for a prominent place on a wide band of its own is the sequence of the lunar mansions that we have met in the North African manuscript LJS 467. Like that presentation, but here conveniently gathered all in one place, the mansions are represented by schematic figures of their stars as well as their names. As the instrument has more precise gradations in degrees than this allows, it is not strictly necessary, but presumably included, at least in part, for the astrological significance of the mansions, which we have seen borne out extensively by the Arabic text. As there, too, there is an integration with an international calendar scheme. Here, in addition to the zodiac signs, in the register just outside the lunar mansions, we see in an inner register transliterations of the Julian month names, indicating where the sun is expected to be in the months in question. So too, the notation in the innermost band of the so-called house rulers, naming the planet to which the zodiac sign aligned above belongs as a house, an astrological doctrine that allowed forecasts based on relations of metaphorical hospitality between planets hosting others in their sign homes. Signs of where on the surface at the center suggest use, that's best seen in this slide, in fact, suggests use by some rotating object or layer placed above, which has now been removed. Also, like the Arabic Codex, the astral sciences in the Hebrew Codex prove a site for cultural contexts. And here's one more illustration in part of a table for converting between the Jewish and the Julian calendar. This is an example of a column headed April, that is in ER. Entries on the right are saint days, and that's specified in the column on the far left. And so, for example, on April 25th, we find transliterated into Hebrew the indication for Saint Mark the Evangelist, with corresponding indications for which day in the month of ER that may be, depending on the place of the year in cycles of intercalation. An interaction with Arabic language scholarship, visible in the star catalog, is represented, one might think, in the other direction too, in the form of marginalia. Apparently someone at least comfortable writing in Arabic numerals, the Eastern as opposed to the derived Western version familiar by this date in Latin manuscripts, was a later owner of this manuscript. This is put into service here for some arithmetic written out in one margin. We see other signs on the same slide of readership in the form of maniculae, pointed this time not at the illustrations, but at the text. Two different annotators in different styles pointing at the same text, a section of one of Abraham ibn Ezra's astrological works. In addition to an emphatically negative forecast, they may be cheering the author's verbal artistry, the pun in the words for zodiac sign, mazel, and fortune, mazel. The one born in a certain part of the former will have none of the latter. A final encouragement for active use is the presence of blank tables on a full-page spread. It is on the next page following them that the greatest concentration of astrological material is copied, also in a hybrid prose table form. Was this invitation taken up during the process of compilation to complement the data of the star catalogs and tables with the analytic tools to realize their use value more fully. With that hypothetical, I will close this survey of 4 manuscripts that I hope have the potential to illustrate the social context of the astral sciences. We can begin to get a sense through these pages of what this knowledge meant in terms of practical choice to include it and context of how it might be deployed to such readers as those of the Greek herbal and medical treatise from Ottoman lands, LJS 62, the homiletic codex supplemented by astral tables at Naples, LJS 361, the prognostication manual based on lunar mansions from North Africa, LJS 467, and the deluxe parchment compendium of image, Hebrew prose, and table from a Jewish community in southern Spain, LJS 57. The number of these owners and readers could be multiplied, which is what I hope to do in future work on this theme. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I'm going to be fielding questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please make a note in the chat. You can ask your question in the chat, or you can just make a note that you have a question. We'll call on you to unmute and ask it. There's many applauses and thanks I see in the chat. Michael, I have, just to begin, it's sort of a general question. It might be not possible to answer it, but these 4 manuscripts, of course, have different paths that upon which they got to us, all through Larry Schoenberg. But I'm wondering about the signs of use that you show, and whether somehow that can be related to the kind of destiny of these manuscripts as things that circulated on the market in later centuries. And what I mean is that, when there are copies of these texts in sort of royal libraries, at the British Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale, maybe in Vienna, maybe at the Vatican. I mean, generally speaking, do those copies have fewer signs of use? And is it, are the copies that were sort of, that we assume sort of were in very prestigious collections actually not consulted that much, whereas copies that were perhaps owned by individuals sort of a little bit lower down on the social ladder that eventually ended up circulating on the book market, whether those copies are sort of tend to exhibit more use because those owners were actually more interested in actually applying and engaging with the manuscript itself. I know that's sort of a broad question, but I wonder if, in your experience, if there's sort of our manuscripts are, famously the LJS manuscripts are, often show signs of use, and that's often, I think, a function of the collector's interest, but also where these manuscripts have been.
Thanks very much, Nick. That's yes, I think it's an excellent series of points for me to keep in mind as I continue. I think I would say, as I continue to look at these sorts of things, I think I can give you some reactions, but they're not fully formed at this point. But as far as this will come, I think, more from the basis I have to make this comparison is more actually this earlier project of medical and magical manuscripts. But I can see it readily what you've described still for me at the level of impressions, but just comparing the herbal botanical manuscript with which I began, LJS 62, with some manuscripts from the British Library and the BNF and the Vatican, indeed, I mean, this is a one-off comparison on the LJS side, but this sort of soiling and spills of liquid across the pages is rather uncommon in those institutions, and here it is. So I would expect, and this is my hope, that I can start to look more systematically at manuscripts in at least the British Library, that might go some way to being tested, that hypothesis. But I think it's an excellent point. And just to sort of to have a excuse to bring it back onto the screen, these charming drawings, which it was in fact one of the ideas that Thorpe was entertaining was that somehow this manuscript leaves a sacral context, enters a private home one way or another, because it's stolen or simply not returned after a loan by either the original copyist or another Dominican, and comes into a house in which children are present. And I think this isn't quite that kind of use, that sort of heavy use that's shown in the herbal, but it's just another way that manuscripts circulate, and yes, as you said, a more private, yes, a pathway through private people, rather than a monastic foundation that is directly taken over by a royal library.
And presumably in this manuscript, these cutout areas are perhaps drawings that were sort of rude or not, or sort of I mean, cut out for their content to kind of censor them.
Well, this is I think this is an open question. I value your perspective on this, and maybe you've seen comparable manuscripts in which we could somehow know. I think that's one possibility. They were cut out because their content was objectionable. Another possibility that I would at least not dismiss is that they were cut out because someone liked them, and they were actually, I don't know, if not sold, then taken and kept for some positive motivation. But I think it must be one of those two.
It's interesting because when one encounters this phenomenon, occasionally in medieval manuscripts of cut out parchment, and the conventional explanation is that somebody just needed a scrap of parchment to write something down. Sure, but when you have it next to these doodles, it's sort of an interesting. Then you kind of wonder, well, has something been excised? Yeah, it's very interesting.
And I think just looking at the sequence here, there were others, but this one is right in the middle of these. 22, 23, 24 is the one that's missing, and then yes, I think there must have been one, at least in this case.
We have a comment or from Gideon Bohack, who'd like to ask a question. Gideon, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much, Michael. Just on the question that was asked before on spills, as I'm sure you know, there have been several studies recently of stains on various manuscripts. A famous example is the birth girdles, where people actually could show that they were used in actual birth because you stains on them and you can analyze them today chemically. So especially if you suspect that the spill is from the recipe or from the concoction made on the basis of the recipe on that page, this is something that could probably be verified or rejected on the basis of a very simple chemical analysis. So again, it's always a matter of money, but it might be interesting to try to get some of the chemists at UPenn to look at this stuff and take a small scrap and analyze it, just the stain. So this was one comment. Another, on the Hebrew manuscript, this inclusion of Christian holidays is, of course, very interesting. And it's something for which we have precedents already in the Cairo-Geniza. In the Cairo-Geniza, you get various astrological almanacs and astronomical almanacs. And there you sometimes also get, things like Saum al-Milad or other Christian holidays. So clearly this goes way back. Maybe it was easier for Jews in the Islamic world. It was much easier for them. But also, even in the Christian world, they sometimes needed that, even in order to know when not to do business with Christians and things like that. So you get these kinds of annotations.
Thanks very much, Gideon. Yes, I think I would be delighted to have the results of chemical analysis. I think that's also a question for Nick and other colleagues as to the potentialities for that. But it's an excellent reminder that theoretically this is possible, and I think the barriers to doing it are always or dropping, so to say. And thank you also, Gideon, for the comparisons from the Geniza. That's helpful to know. Also that it's this very same holiday, that the Saum al-Milad that's named there.
And just as a note, we did about 8 years ago, we had Mellon medieval fellow Aaron Connolly, who was doing a project on the bioanalysis of stains in some of our manuscripts. I don't think LJS 62 was included, and I'm not sure the results were conclusive because there's also a question of whether the scientific testing involves having to take a sample, whether it's destructive or non-destructive, and obviously if it's destructive analysis, it's not really possible, or at least not something we readily will be able to do. But it's a very, very interesting point. There's Stefan Kamala has a question. Stefan, if you would like to go ahead and unmute.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you for this really interesting tasting menu of manuscripts. I'm just starting to sort of look into the astrological manuscripts of the Eastern Islamic world. And my understanding is that the system of these stations of the moon is sort of a rarity in the manuscripts. It shows up here and there, but it doesn't actually really play a role in formal astrology in the Greco-Arabic tradition. And yet the two manuscripts you've shown from the Hebrew and Arabic traditions both engage with the lunar stations. And I noticed they're also both from the West. They're Maghribi and Andalusian, right? I didn't catch dates on the manuscripts, but I'm wondering if there's anything you can say about the chronological and geographical sort of context for when the lunar stations show up in manuscripts on a broader scale, not just in these 4 manuscripts, but more generally.
Thanks very much. I just for the dates on these two, I would put the Arabic manuscript in. Maybe it's helpful if I can go back to it. The right direction. So 467. I would put in the 14th century. I think the watermark places it no earlier than that, at least. And the Hebrew manuscript will have been probably shortly after 1391, when the star catalog has been for the date for which the star catalog has been actualized. I have to say, in all honesty, the lunar mansions are not a subject of expertise for me either, coming from a background more of ancient Greco-Roman and late ancient Greco-Roman astrology. From what I've seen so far, they're not so widespread, and or one could say they show up in specific contexts. I think this what one calls mundane astrology, rather than so they wouldn't be coming up in horoscopy, which take up a lot of the surviving texts, especially in sort of elite discourses. Personal astrology tends to be overrepresented That's certainly true for antiquity. I think it becomes less so in the Middle Ages, but I think that's still just affecting the picture. I think what I should come back to is that the lunar mansions seem to have the strongest representation in weather forecasting and related things about the effects that the year's climate will have on society, if I can say it that way. And that does seem to have a motivation in especially the history, the prehistory of the Anwa as being used for weather forecasting. There is a pre-Islamic, an ancient Arabian tradition of this. And if I can, so this article by Barisco traces that, and that's the best I know. The best I know represents the best that I know about it.
Okay, thank you.
And just to circle back to Gideon's question, we did have a guest lecture by Sasha Stern last year as part of our Sims Katz Center distinguished fellowship, and he looked at particularly at the calendar in LJS 57 and related it, the inclusion of Christian saints days to some other examples of other examples elsewhere in other manuscripts. So something to look out for. And he's, I think, potentially working on an article about this phenomenon for our journal, Manuscript Studies. We had a question about, I see Lynn has answered it, about digitization. So yes, all of these items are that Michael has been speaking about are digitized. And I mean, in terms of AI, we've been thinking about this question a lot, and not technically AI, but automated character recognition for manuscripts. Historic manuscripts is a huge area of current scholarly interest, but it's not yet at the stage where it's very reliable without a significant amount of work for particular manuscripts like this. And so AI, just asking it, and I've experimented a little bit with this to sort of tell you about a manuscript that does not have a current transcription, is not very successful because the AI has no access to the textual content of the manuscript, though it might try, right? Or it might assume based on some of the metadata what is inside it. So that's an interesting sort of tangent. But
I would add to that, Nick, that since all of our data is available freely for any purpose, you're certainly welcome to try to do whatever you want to with it, to download the images, download the metadata, and let us know what happens.
And we have a question from Alex Fatis, a question who says, I might be mistaken, but I think it was the Hebrew manuscript had 2 illuminations of signs. Maybe that could be a reference to, I think the manuscript has some overpainting as well. So there's some later editions of paint. I'm not sure if that is what and so Alex says, as an art worker myself, I noticed the stylization of the drawings as well as the pigment looked quite similar to Western European manuscript illuminations. Does this perhaps speak of a two-way exchange of ideas and style, or simply a forced stylization based on available tools and pigments? Any thoughts about that, Michael?
I think again, this is I'm now straying into an area that is not one of expertise. The art historical aspect, and specifically the technique of these how to say of these two, which is not necessarily the same. And I think this wasn't what Ellie Decker was. This wasn't her focus. Her focus was on the iconography, not the technique. I think a study of the technique, comparing, in fact, the two hemispheres with the catalog images would be really interesting. Yes, I don't think I would be able to distinguish sort of background in conscious exchange of technique versus forced adaptation. I think in thinking about production in southern Spain or what's now southern Spain or Portugal at this time, I would think there could still be access to both traditional strands, and so it would depend on what one could certainly imagine the possibility of more conscious choice between the two. But I think another thing that I would say is that we shouldn't assume that whoever executed the paintings was the same as the compiler of the manuscript, and then that perhaps removes a restriction that person, the artist, was a member of a Jewish community or any other particular community. So I think that's a point to keep in mind. It doesn't really answer the question, and unfortunately, I think that's beyond me at this point.
Wonderful. Well, we do have a few more minutes scheduled, but if there are no further questions, I think it's something like 3 o'clock in the morning for Michael. So we may just take the opportunity to thank him again for a wonderful lecture and a real engagement with 4 of our wonderful manuscripts at the Schoenberg Institute. So thank you so much, Michael. And I encourage all of you to take a look at the digital images. Lynn has posted links in the chat. There's lots to explore, and these are open access images, of course. So we look forward to seeing what else people find, and to following your scholarship, Michael. So thank you, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks everyone.